In World War II, some of the most important battles were not fought with tanks, rifles, or bombs. They were fought with paper, wires, intersected radio messages, and mathematics. The machine at the center of that hidden war was called Enigma. To Nazi Germany, Enigma was more than a cipher machine. It was the lock on their entire military nervous system. Army orders, U-boat positions, Luftwaffe movements, supply instructions, weather reports, and battlefield plans all passed through coded messages. German commanders believed those messages were secure. They had reason to believe it. Enigma could scramble a message into an enormous number of possible settings. Every day the settings changed. If you did not know the exact rotor order, plugboard connections, and starting positions, the message looked like nonsense. To most intelligence services in Europe, the problem seemed almost impossible. But before Bletchley Park became famous, before Alan Turing became the name most people remember, the first major breakthrough happened in Poland. In the early 1930s, Polish intelligence knew Germany was becoming dangerous. Poland sat between Germany and the Soviet Union, and Polish leaders understood that their survival might depend on knowing what their enemies planned before the shooting started. So Polish cryptologists attacked Enigma not as a language problem, but as a mathematical one. 3 young mathematicians became central to the effort: Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Rozycki, and Henryk Zygalski. They were not soldiers storming beaches. They were quiet men working through patterns. They studied permutations, wiring, repeated indicators, and small mistakes in German procedure. Piece by piece, they reconstructed how the machine worked. That achievement was extraordinary. The Polish team did not simply guess a code word. They worked out the logic of the machine itself. They built replicas. They designed tools. They found ways to exploit German habits. Every time Germany changed the system, the Poles adapted. This mattered because Enigma was not one message. It was a stream. Every intercepted transmission was a tiny window into a much larger war. If the Allies could read even part of that stream, they could see where submarines were hunting, where aircraft were moving, and where German commanders believed the next fight would happen. Then the situation changed. In the late 1930s, Germany made Enigma harder to break. The machine settings became more complex. The number of possible combinations exploded. Poland had the knowledge, but not the industrial resources to keep scaling the attack alone. By the summer of 1939, war was almost certain. Germany was preparing to invade. Polish intelligence made one of the most important decisions of the 20th century. They would share what they knew. In July 1939, Polish codebreakers met with British and French intelligence. They revealed the methods they had developed. They handed over replicas of the machine. They gave away years of secret work because there was no time left to protect national pride. Weeks later, Germany invaded Poland. Poland was crushed between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. But the code-breaking knowledge escaped. And in Britain, that knowledge became the foundation for a much larger operation at Bletchley Park. Bletchley Park was not glamorous. It was a strange wartime village of huts, machines, clerks, linguists, mathematicians, engineers, and thousands of women whose work stayed secret for decades. Messages arrived in endless streams. Operators copied signals, analysts searched for patterns, machines ran day and night. Alan Turing and others helped design the bomb, an electromechanical machine that tested possible Enigma settings at a speed humans never could. But the work was never one person's story. It depended on Polish breakthroughs, British engineering, captured documents, operator mistakes, naval intelligence, and an entire workforce trained to notice the smallest clue. The stakes were highest in the Atlantic. Britain was an island. It needed food, fuel, weapons, and supplies from across the ocean. German U-boats tried to cut those lifelines. Convoys of merchant ships crossed the Atlantic under constant threat. If the U-boats succeeded, Britain could be starved into defeat. Reading Enigma did not make the U-boats vanish. The ocean was still huge, the weather was brutal, and German submarines were deadly. But codebreaking gave Allied commanders a chance. They could reroute convoys away from wolf packs. They could direct aircraft and escorts toward danger zones. They could see patterns before those patterns became disasters. The codebreakers were also helped by the harsh reality that no system is used perfectly forever. German operators made mistakes. They repeated habits. They sent routine phrases. Sometimes they became predictable because war itself was repetitive. Weather reports, status updates, convoy sightings, and daily procedures created structure. A machine can create mathematical complexity, but human behavior often creates openings. The Allies also captured material from German ships and submarines. Codebooks, weather keys, and machine parts could become priceless. A single recovered document might make thousands of future messages easier to read. That is why some naval raids and boarding actions mattered far beyond the battlefield. They were not just attempts to seize equipment, they were attempts to steal time. Time was everything. A message that took 3 weeks to decode might be historically interesting, but operationally useless. A message decoded quickly could save a convoy. It could reveal where U-boats were gathering. It could show whether German commanders had discovered an Allied deception. The secret war was not only about breaking the code, it was about breaking it fast enough to matter. That pressure shaped daily life at Bletchley Park. Workers did not always know the full purpose of what they were doing. One person might copy signals, another might sort message traffic, another might maintain a machine, another might search for a pattern in repeated fragments. The system worked because the work was divided into pieces. Each piece looked small. Together the pieces formed a weapon. For many of the women at Bletchley, the work was exhausting and anonymous. They operated machines through long shifts. They handled message slips, punched cards, and mechanical checks. They were expected to be precise and silent. If they made a mistake, a chain of analysis could fail. If they talked about the work outside the fences, lives could be put at risk. The secrecy was so strict that even inside Bletchley, many workers only understood their own narrow task. A person in one hut might not know what another hut was doing. That compartmentalization protected the operation. If one part was compromised, the whole system might survive. It also meant that thousands of people helped change the war without ever seeing the complete picture. Sometimes the codebreakers knew more than they could safely use. If the Allies reacted too perfectly, Germany might realize Enigma had been broken. So commanders had to hide the source. They used reconnaissance aircraft as cover. They waited. They let some information pass unused. Intelligence was powerful, but it was also dangerous. Use it too openly and the enemy changes the lock. That is what made the secret war so difficult. It was not enough to read the messages. The Allies had to act on them without revealing how they knew. Enigma also shaped battles far from the Atlantic. It helped with North Africa. It helped with air defense. It helped reveal German supply problems and movement patterns. It gave Allied planners a clearer picture of the enemy's mind. In North Africa, supply was destiny. Armies could only fight as long as fuel, ammunition, food, and replacement parts reached them. Intelligence about shipments and shortages could reveal what an enemy force was actually capable of doing. A commander might look strong on a map, but be close to collapse in reality. Codebreaking helped expose that hidden weakness. Before major operations, intelligence also helped planners judge deception. If the Allies wanted Germany to believe an attack was coming in one place, while the real attack came somewhere else, they needed feedback. Did German commanders believe the lie? Were troops moving? Were reserves being held back? Intercepted messages could answer those questions without asking the enemy directly. That is why the secret war connected to so many famous operations. Codebreaking did not replace soldiers. It made soldiers' risks more calculated. It helped commanders decide where to send ships, when to protect convoys, what threats were real, and which enemy reactions were panic, confusion, or confidence. The impact is hard to measure exactly, because intelligence rarely wins a war by itself. A decoded message does not capture a hill, it does not land on a beach, it does not build a tank, but it changes decisions, it reduces uncertainty, it tells commanders where not to sail, where to strike, and when the enemy is weaker than he appears. Historians often say that codebreaking shortened the war. Some estimate by years. That means millions of lives may have been affected by work that almost nobody knew existed at the time. And then when the war ended, the secret stayed secret. Many people who worked at Bletchley Park went home and said nothing. Women who had operated machines, sorted messages, translated intercepts, and handled classified material could not tell their husbands, children, or friends what they had done. Some families only learned the truth decades later. Poland's role also remained underappreciated. The story people learned was often simple. British codebreakers broke Enigma. The real story was more complicated and more impressive. Poland cracked the door open first. Britain built an industrial-scale system to keep it open. Thousands of workers kept that system alive. The victory belonged to a network, not a single genius. That matters because simple history can erase the people who made victory possible. Rejewski, Rozycki, and Zygalski were not side notes. Their work changed what Britain and France could do when the war began. Without the Polish foundation, Bletchley Park would have started much farther behind. The Allies might still have made progress eventually, but in war, eventually can be too late. The Polish contribution also reveals something important about defeat. Poland was conquered in 1939, but it did not simply disappear from the war. Polish pilots fought in the Battle of Britain. Polish soldiers fought across Europe. Polish intelligence continued to operate, and before Poland fell, its codebreakers had already sent one of its most valuable weapons west. That is a different kind of resistance, not a last stand in a street, not a charge across a battlefield, a handoff in a room before the disaster arrived. A decision that said, if we cannot keep this safe here, then the enemy cannot be allowed to bury it with us. For decades, public memory did not fully reflect that. The secrecy around Enigma protected post-war intelligence methods, but it also delayed recognition. By the time the story became widely known, many of the people involved were old or gone. Some never heard the thanks they deserved. There is a reason this story still matters. World War II is often remembered through visible power: armies, aircraft carriers, bombers, battleships, and mushroom clouds. But Enigma shows another kind of power: the power of preparation, the power of math, the power of sharing knowledge before it is too late. The Nazis believed their machine made their secrets untouchable. They trusted it because it looked complicated enough to be safe. But complexity is not the same as security. A system can be brilliant and still fail because people use it imperfectly. A machine can be advanced and still vulnerable to patience. That lesson did not end in 1945. Modern encryption, cyber warfare, surveillance, and intelligence all carry the same warning. The strongest system can be weakened by procedure, assumptions, overconfidence, and human habit. Enigma was not broken because the codebreakers were lucky once. It was broken because they treated every detail as meaningful. They understood that the enemy's confidence was itself a weakness. German commanders trusted Enigma so deeply that they kept using it. The machine gave them a feeling of safety. That feeling became dangerous. The more they trusted the system, the more valuable every decoded message became. The codebreakers did not win by being louder. They won by being exact. They listened to static. They stared at paper. They followed patterns that seemed meaningless until one detail connected to another. While armies moved across continents, they fought a silent battle inside messages. And the most important part is this: the story began before the war. Poland did not wait until the invasion to start thinking. It invested in intelligence early. It trusted mathematicians. It treated information as a weapon. When collapse came, Polish codebreakers made sure that weapon did not die with Poland's defeat. That is why the Enigma story is not just about a machine. It is about a chain of decisions. Polish mathematicians deciding the impossible was worth attempting. Intelligence officers deciding to share their secrets. British engineers deciding to build machines at scale. Thousands of workers deciding to keep silent even after history owed them recognition. The war was changed by people most of the world never saw. Not every hero carried a rifle. Some carried notebooks, some wired machines, some typed intercepted messages in cold huts at night. Some spent years unable to explain why they had mattered. Imagine doing work that may have saved ships, shortened battles, and protected thousands of lives, then being ordered to pretend it never happened. Imagine hearing people discuss the war for decades while you sit silently, knowing you had been inside one of its deepest secrets. That was the burden many codebreakers carried. The Enigma story is powerful because it changes the shape of heroism. It shows that courage can be intellectual. It can be disciplined silence. It can be a willingness to do repetitive work perfectly because somewhere far away, a convoy might depend on it. Hitler's armies tried to control Europe with force. The codebreakers fought back with information, and in the end, one of the most important weapons of World War II was not a tank or a bomber. It was the ability to read the enemy's secrets before the enemy knew those secrets had been stolen.